Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining. I'm Jonathan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Stitch. And what we do is help sites engage and retain their clinical trial participants from screening all the way through to the end of the study. And so just wanted to welcome everybody to the webinar today. This is actually the first in a series of webinars that we're running to help support sites in how they engage their trial participants. And I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Snedaker, the CEO of West Clinical Research. So today, Luke is going to share his insights from running a site business, outline the impact that he saw from working with Stitch, and how this helped him land in the top 10 enrolling sites globally for a major vaccine study. So just a massive thank you to Luke for joining us today, and to you all as well. It's going to be a great conversation. And feel free to share your thoughts and questions as we go, and we'll leave space for questions at the end of the session. So with that, Luke, can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got started in the site world, what led you to running a site business? You know, that whole story would be great to share.
Sure. Yeah. And thanks. So I'm Luke. I'm the CEO of West Clinical Research, and I run a research site here in Eastern North Carolina called West Clinical Research. My background is all on the site side of the industry. So I started actually as a medical assistant in clinical research, but right there, entry level, worked my way through being a clinical research coordinator and ultimately to running clinical research sites. I typically specialize at the sites that I'm at right now in taking sites to the next level of their growth, whether that's they starting from scratch and nothing and turning them into a research site that's fully functional, or maybe an independent single site trying to grow into a network, or even a network that's trying to professionalize and grow at scale past being just a multi-site network. So we typically have done multi-therapeutic areas here at West Clinical, and really what we dive into is just anything that's gen med, vaccines, and a bunch of different specialties as well, like orthopedics or rheumatology.
Fantastic. And it sounds like you've worked across like every single stage of a site's growth or site network's growth, which is really interesting. And I'm just curious, as you go through that journey from different sorts of sites at different sorts of stages, what are some of the month-to-month realities of running that sort of business and the problems that you run into and the challenges you focus on?
Sure, and it's definitely been interesting across the different types of sites that I've worked at, what their challenges are. But what all of them come down to is if you're a site, you have to have patients that are qualified show up, and they need to be screened into a study and qualify for the studies. So really your primary goal there is making sure that you can find qualified candidates who then actually show up in the clinic to screen for visits and see if they qualify for the studies. And it was that common theme of making sure that the patients show up to their appointments. You've spent probably a lot of money getting the lead, and then making sure that they show up is pretty typical across all sites. Basically just enrollment, making sure that you're meeting enrollment goals and the different things you need to navigate to make sure that happens. So we spend an enormous amount of time trying to find patients that qualify. And once we find them, it's how do you optimize those leads of patients they qualify. You need to make sure that they actually enroll into a study. Then making sure that they stay in the study. And each of those is its own challenge, right? Finding the patients, getting them to show up and screen, and then maintaining them and having that retention long-term in the trial. And in terms of commonalities across all the different types of sites I've worked at, that always is a key theme. If you can't do those three things as a site, you're not going to succeed long-term. So those are really the ones that I like to hone in on. And if we can solve those problems, everything else kind of flushes out and you have time to work on it.
And so that's really interesting. It's the finding, the getting them in, and then the keeping. Those are sort of the key stages. And when you look at those processes, right, how do you manage that? And how historically have you done that? Like, how do you drive those things?
Typically, it's been a lot of manpower. You put highly trained team members on the phones, and you make a lot of phone calls. There's a lot of missed connections where people don't answer. You leave voicemails, they call back, you play phone tag a few times, and it's really just a lot of manpower. I've set up call centers where you have dozens of people that are just sitting on the phone contacting patients, whether it's for recruitment or it's making sure that they're going to show up to the next appointment, reminding them about diaries. It can be any of
Yeah.
those. It was all about manpower of getting enough time on the phone that you're creating that engagement, that touch point, and then ensuring that the patient shows up when they're supposed to. So like that's super important that they show up when they're supposed to, because A, we need to be
Mm.
compliant with the protocol, but B is at the site, you're limited on your capacity that you can have in terms of visits across a day. So if you schedule an appointment and that person doesn't show up because maybe you didn't contact them enough or didn't verify that they were coming or that they understood their appointment time, that's now
Mm.
wasted time. You can't get that time slot back if you haven't double booked it or triple booked it. So we put a lot of time and effort historically into contact the patient, ensure they know when to show up, how to get here, they're comfortable with the entire process, and that they're committed to coming to that appointment. But that's expensive.
Yeah.
So,
And is that why you invest so much in that process, right? Because it links so tightly to the business model of the site.
right. It is intimately linked to the business model succeeding. We put a tremendous amount of resources into finding the patients. To find a patient and know that they qualify, only to have them not show up is just it's detrimental. So we
Mm.
do everything that we can to ensure that they do show up, and we've put a lot of processes and a lot of trial and error into what's the
Mm.
best way to contact patients, to make sure that they show up.
Yeah.
So we were pretty proud of our process before. So
Yes.
that was actually one of the interesting things about this whole project that we're doing is how
Yeah.
proud we were of it before versus kind of what we saw when we really did the testing.
What was your process in that? So you talked about people, you talked about phone calls and so on, but didn't we just go one level deeper? Like, what were you doing day to day
Yeah. So
to guide people through?
day to day, we had a dedicated team member who goes through the appointment for the next, usually a week, and they
Mm.
set up scheduled text message reminders and phone calls to make sure that each patient is contacted ahead of time. And we send just it's like a pretty typical block text of information about their next visit. Just,
Hmm.
hey, your appointment time is at this on this date. Call us or text us if you need to reschedule or if you can't come. And
Mm.
we schedule those out for 1 week out and for 2 days out from their visit. And then if we don't get a response, we try calling them. And we felt that was a pretty robust process and
Yeah.
it drastically improved where we were. But
Mm.
that person was spending a lot of time every day doing that. It was a huge manual lift
Yeah.
to actually make it happen. So a lot of resources spent in trying to deal with this no-show problem.
And so you were looking for technologies that could potentially help or support that. And I'm just curious, like, you know, how we met and sort of what you saw about what we were doing that you thought could fit that model. Because, at the time, us at Stitch, we weren't even really, we were supporting sites, but it wasn't as much of a core focus for us as it is now. And you saw something in what we were doing, and I'm just curious if you could, what that was.
Yeah, funny. Stitch wasn't that at all. That was like it was like it didn't fit. It didn't fit
Mm.
my model. It didn't fit anything. And really, what it fit was it was like working the other direction. I saw what you had, and I almost wanted to talk to you guys about like how can we meet in the middle here, because I want
Mm.
my patients to have the experience that I'm seeing on screen right now. This is what I want our participants to see and the information that they can have, etc. So I didn't know how it was going to fit into our workflow, and in fact, the way that it was before, it didn't fit at all. But
Mm.
that was almost why we kept talking, was the interest that I saw on your end, and then the
Mm.
interest that I had in my end of wanting that product for our
Yeah.
patients. And I think that level of engagement between us at that first meeting was how it happened. I mean, I was just cruising through the conference hall. I think it was at Scope. I was drinking
Yes.
my
Yeah. And
espresso
all that.
martini. It was the end of the
I think you were
conference.
double. I think you had two at the
I had
time
one for someone
potentially. No,
else. I definitely had one
of
for someone
course,
else,
of
right?
course.
But then yeah, whatever. So anyway, the espresso martini was set up, and I was literally walking past the booth and I saw and I said, what is that? Like, that's what I want. And we just kept talking, and it seemed like as soon as you were open to talking about letting a site use this across all of their study portfolio of
Yeah.
studies. That is a key marker for me. I cannot implement a technology at our site that I can't put across at least the vast majority of our studies. We have too many workflows that are only single study, like attributed to a single study, that come down from the sponsors or the CROs. And that just destroys a site's workflow, because one person might be working on 5 or 10 studies at any given time and see a patient, like say it's a research assistant. A research assistant might see 5 to 10 visits in a day. They need to have a consistent platform to record information in or to get information from. The coordinators might be working across 3 to 5 studies. They might see 3 or 4 patients in a day. And if they've got 20 systems to use for each of those studies,
Yeah.
we didn't want to add another one in that was just for a couple of studies and not for others. So when we could flip the script and make sure that Stitch could be implemented across all of our protocols and become an actual site text, like part of our site's tech stack, that's when I was like, okay, we're not there yet, but I see what you have. You've gotten past that first milestone. We can meet and make this work. And it seems like that's what we really worked on.
Yeah,
So
it was really interesting. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
go.
So what I was gonna say was, like, the key there was what I saw on screen and what I saw, and I think that's important for the rest of the attendees to see as well. So if you can pull up that demo and show them kind of what our site looks like, what our patients get to see, and I think that would be really meaningful right now, because that was the stopper for me. I was like, how can we make that work?
Yeah, so give me just a second, and I'll bring this up. And as I bring this, and what I'll do is I'll bring up your demo environment, Luke. And just before bringing this up, I think the key is to say we've built this to be friction free from the participant side and from the site side. So from the participant side, it's a web app. There's no download you need to push to anybody. There's no logins or passwords for participants. It's super easy to access. And we'll talk a bit more about how we integrate this into the site tech stack. Let me just share the right thing here. Okay, so you should be seeing this is your demo environment. So we're showing WCR's demo environment. Everything is branded for them. It's worth noticing and highlighting all of the study details that you see are examples. So there's no real study data here. But this is what a participant now sees on a West Clinical Research study. And so, Luke, what was it about this that resonated for you?
It's simple. The patient doesn't have to log in, and then when they get it, it's the first thing they see is they see that it's customized for them. It's their appointment date and time, tells them how long they can expect their appointment to go, which is a question that we always get. But in our manual text messages, that was so hard to make happen because every visit's different. So it was a person that had to go through and try to figure out how long each visit was going to be based on across all of our studies. It gives them the directions. Now, there's multiple types of visits, right? You're interacting with a screening patient. That's the first interaction with them. That's a little different than someone that's already enrolled in the study. And most of our no-shows come from screenings. It's where we haven't really engaged with this patient yet. They might be skeptical of clinical research. We've probably only had a phone conversation with them, doing a pre-screener and telling them about it. So to give them a professional view where they're like, oh, this is a legitimate company. This isn't just some side job clinic that's going to poke something in my arm. They get to see a refined informatic, like professional portal here. Where you click the link and it opens. It's customized for them, tells them where our office is, how to find us. We got the pictures there so they know which door. We're in a large multi-specialty building, so it's like a medical building. They know what our door looks like. That gives them a little instructions of, not just the address, but hey, we're actually across from that Bojangles in Moorhead. And everyone's like, oh, I know where the Bojangles is. All right, yeah, I'll be right there. It's kind of fun. It tells them a little bit about who they're going to get to see that day. And that's good because some patients might not want to see, they just may be skeptical about, some women patients might not want to see a male coordinator. They might feel more comfortable with a female coordinator. So they can bring that up if they see it, et cetera. So it's not a giant block of text, which is what we typically send in text messages. It's overwhelming and not pretty. This was pretty, and that's pretty counts, right? So I saw this and said, that's what I want my participants to see. How can my site have that?
And it's worth highlighting as well, we replaced, and thinking of things that are pretty, I'd always say my daughter is, but there's you also have all of the text messages and all of that flow as well, and the email flow too, which is from West Clinical. So we brand everything down to the sender of the emails as well, and all of that information is there as well. So there's this, people can confirm their attendance, and then that's data that you can see on your side who's confirmed, who hasn't. And again, everything links from those messages and emails directly into the platform. So there's very little that a participant needs to do. Cool. I'll stop sharing there for the moment, but I'm just, one of the questions that we get asked is, how does this integrate with our, with the site's workflow, with the CTMS existing processes? And I'm just, how, before we talk a little bit about the results and what's moved for you, but I'm just, how does that workflow shift, and what's been that impact?
What's been the impact? Yeah. So first,
the workflow shift as well.
On the workflow shift. Yeah. The workflow shift has been pretty straightforward. It took maybe an hour or two to really set up each study. On the front end, we do it at study startup. It was super easy with your team. Basically just the informed consent and the protocol, everything gets IRB approved, and then you're off to the races. It integrates with our CTMS system, which is huge, because what I don't want is another login that more of my team members have to continuously log into. And so what we do instead is our admin team or our coordinators, when we just schedule a patient as we normally would as part of our workflow in our CTMS system, which is something we have to do anyways, that gets pushed into Stitch. And it's that push that basically means I didn't even have to train any of our team on using Stitch. They barely know that it's there, other than the fact that they have to make less phone calls and text messages now, because they just do their normal workflow scheduling in the CTMS system. And then all of this is implemented on the back end. It's all run on the back end. So your whole team doesn't have to go through training on how to build this or how to push things out. No. We just schedule in the CTMS system, and it all flows through on its own. And that's been really great, because one of my team members it was funny. She was doing the text messages and phone calls like around her lunch break. And she said, it's really great. Now I get to go home and let my dogs out and play with them at lunchtime. And that was meaningful, because I didn't know that she was working through her lunch to do that. I never would have asked her to do that, but that was when she decided she liked sending them, and she doesn't have to do that anymore. So that's been a fun change in our workflow, and it was good to hear that feedback from the team.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's a great example of something like the personal impact and the admin time shift as well, and how this integrates into that workflow. But I'm just curious, we talked a bit about no-shows, and I think there's a question as well as to what that question, what was that rate before? So I'm curious, can you share a little bit about the impact that you've seen in sort of some of the more sort of core business metrics since you rolled out Stitch, and a bit about the study that you looked at this on, to start with.
Yeah. So this core study that we were working on, it was a large vaccine trial, big phase 3 study, over 300 sites, I think closer to 350 sites. And we ended up being a top 10 enroller on the study. And Stitch was super important in that, because what we found at the beginning of the study was we ran an A/B test, and that A/B test showed that, some patients I was skeptical. I'm a skeptic of technology and adding it into our processes. So when we added Stitch, I said, let's do an A/B test, right? And we gave some patients would get Stitch and some didn't. It was completely random. And basically the patients that were getting stitched, there was a 27% reduction in no-shows for the patients that had stitch versus those that didn't, which was really meaningful for us, because when you reduce no-shows, that's a pretty direct correlation with enrolling more patients. Our screen flow rate's less than 5% for this study. So when a patient shows up, they typically qualify. That was tremendous. So I think it was like 27% reduction in no-shows, ultimately an 18% increase in enrollment. And that's not just because of the scheduling and the informatics that they're getting prior to their screening appointment or prior to any appointment. It was also because we were sending those win-back surveys. So basically, if a patient didn't show up to their appointment, we send that really friction-free, kind of low social barrier no-shows survey. And patients would say, oh, you know what? I didn't come because I didn't have travel that day. I didn't have a way to get here that day. And I'm like, I'll get you an Uber Health. Like, we can get you here. Don't worry. Or that appointment time didn't work and I can only come in at 5 o'clock, not 10 o'clock because of my work schedule. Okay, well, we actually have days every week that we're open a little bit later. So you can come in on those days. And they might have been afraid to tell that to us on the phone because they're embarrassed. They said they were going to come. They didn't show up. But a survey is a little bit less socially awkward. They can just click a button and then we got the information, called them back and had those win backs. So ultimately, 18% increase in enrollment side on that side versus the non-stitch side.
And that's really interesting. And I think, so that's a huge impact, right? An 18% increase in enrollment and that reduction. And in those sort of vaccine studies, that can be quite a high rate to begin with. I'm also curious, how did you use the system to target? Because you had the ability now for participants to confirm their attendance. Did you use that as well in your workflows with your team to sort of reduce or be more targeted in your outreach?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said at the beginning, when you don't have like a true appointment confirmation system, you have to call everybody, even the patients that were already going to show up. So you're only like marginally increasing the actual number of patients that you're now making sure show up who weren't going to show up otherwise. So it's almost a lot of wasted time. What we did now was we could go through Stitch really quickly and say, oh, okay, well, these, 70% of these patients already confirmed. We probably don't need to get in touch with them again. But the 30% that haven't confirmed, let's call them and touch it. So we basically got all that. It's all the people that confirmed. We don't have to create a redundant system to get in touch with them again. We get to skip all of that, just contact the people who haven't confirmed, and now do the higher touch with those patients to see, to basically target and say, okay, why aren't they confirming? Do they need to reschedule their appointment, or do they need to have some type of rideshare program to get them here, or are they skeptical and they just need a longer conversation to get to know us before they want to come in, etc. So that was that really reduced the amount of time that we were spending every day. I think it was like 80% reduction in time or something like that we were spending on phone calls and texting reminders, which was huge for us. So ultimately, by reducing that no-show rate, because we're so limited on capacity, we were actually optimizing our coordinator time better and optimizing our appointment schedule better. And that was super meaningful for our team. And it meant that we could actually control the schedule better. I mean, the solution before was, well, your no-show rate's 50% sometimes on these vaccine studies for screening appointments. Just double book the appointments. But then everyone shows up one day and I'll never hear the end of it. So we can't do that. So instead, we basically tried to really hone in and target, okay, which patients are going to show up, which aren't, in a really easy to see format that's just like already set up for that specifically. Okay, call these 5 or 10 patients that didn't confirm and get in touch with them instead of calling all 40.
Okay, fantastic. And that feels like a tremendous impact. I'm just going to touch on some of the questions that have come in from the Q&A, as I think some of these might be quite interesting to touch on. I think One of the questions is, what was the no-show rate before the 27% improvement? Trying to get some understanding of the from to. I think you've touched on it, but I'm wondering if you could be a little more explicit.
Yeah, for this specific study, actually, it was about 50%, which was abnormally high for us, I'd say, and it was because the vast majority of these patients were coming from advertising, and they were our first interaction with these patients. It was because of the specific study. When we do, gen med studies, no-show rates are significantly lower than that. But for this study, we were seeing about 50%, which was shocking to us. We were floored at the no-show rate, which is why we found a solution quickly and implemented it.
Fantastic. And then a question on dealing with repeat no-shows, whether there's a predictor or double booking. I'll touch on the Stitch side. The way that we support that is by asking for confirmation, so we can see and give that information to the site as to whether someone's confirmed, so you can target that outreach as Luke has described. We also have a win back process that we put in if people sort of aren't flowing through. But does WCR use a double booking strategy or something like that? There's a question around there on repeats.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if we book an appointment and they don't confirm, we can't get in touch with them, et cetera, we're going to double book that appointment. But that means that it's a lot less double booking than what we were doing before, which was basically double book every other time spot, no matter what, and just hope that it falls out. But what ends up happening is your operations get upside down when you do that. You get overwhelmed. Patients have bad experiences because inevitably everyone's going to show up one day, and you're going to have twice as many appointments as you have capacity for. So we don't want to do that to our patients, our coordinators, or our sub-investigators or primary principal investigator. So the approach that we have now, I'll say the team's a lot happier with that approach versus a much higher rate of double booking approach that we had done previously.
It feels more risky operationally for any given day versus having a sort of a more predictable model.
Yeah, it's definitely more predictable. We have a better idea of what our days are going to look like day in and day out. And what's neat about that is that means that if we have, let's say we don't have a backlog of patients we're scheduling, we can make a recruitment push 3 days out and schedule some next day appointments. That's great. I love that. Get them in quick. So that it helps us have better information to do that appropriately.
Fantastic.
Once the day is gone, if you have an empty time as a site, if you have an empty time slot and that goes by, you can't get it back. You can't just double capacity the next day. Like, we're already running at pretty high rates. So yeah, it's important to optimize your time slots as a site.
Yeah. Just a question on your recruitment. I think you've touched on it, that this was a more general sort of advertising piece, but just a question on how you recruit and the information you share before those screening visits and how you're managing that.
So I'm trying to think. Basically, we run through a pre-screener. We give them general information about clinical research, what it means to be involved, and then we try to give them information that they can expect to be given at the visit. But ultimately, it's what patients are seeing when they get their message from Stitch now is light years more professional and organized. And also, because we get everything IRB approved, it's super easy. So I'm not sure if I answered your question there.
And what's next, I think, is my question. Like, what are the other things that you're looking to do and solve with Stitch?
Okay, so diary compliance, huge. Diary compliance is huge for us. I mean, if you're on a vaccine study or really any type of a pain study, diary compliance, we get hounded by the sponsors all the time. You need to be above 90%. And we strive to do that, and we typically do, but it's difficult. It requires a lot of manual labor of calling and texting patients over and over. We basically integrate now diary reminders into the patient's contact communication system so that when it's time for them to do their diaries, they get a little text message reminder. And that's great because a lot of these patients don't carry around their eCOA devices with them, so they don't get true push notifications. They have to know to go pick up their device, their eCOA, device, and do it. They don't have a reminder. So they're getting text messages now that just says, hey, time to do your diary, on their phone instead of on their device. Yeah. And then they can know, okay, I need to go home and do that, or I need to pull that out of my purse and do it. It's super easy.
And all of that without your team having to sort of look at which
Do it
team,
manually.
which person has been at which point and when their thing's going to be
Yep,
open.
it's all
And
based
has
on the
that,
CTMS.
and is that having an impact on the compliance? Are you seeing that start to tick up?
Yeah, I mean, we on one, I'm giving you guys some dirty laundry here. On one study, we dropped a little below 90%, so we were actually at like 86%, and we were not happy about it at all. And we're back up to 91% right now, and that was
Oh, fantastic.
across about a 2-week period.
And that's from us implementing these reminders
That
in
was
Stitch for
from
you're
them
doing
getting
this
the reminders.
automatically.
Yep, exactly.
Fantastic. Well, I know. Thank you so much, Lee. I think we're um up at time
Okay.
for this, but we'll give people just a moment to share their to share some more questions. If people want to stay on and ask some questions, we're happy to take some more. Is there anything else additionally that you would like to add, Luke, in terms of sort of your experiences or sort of how you view technology at a site level?
It's got to be implemented across all the protocols. It's got to make sense and grow and scale with us without adding a lot of manpower. We grow quickly as sites. When you add a new study, you might double your capacity from that one study over the course of a month, and you need to be able, your systems need to be flexible and grow with you on that.
Yeah.
Being able to do that without adding manpower, and then when that study's over, meaning that you don't have to get rid of people because you have all that extra manpower now.
Yeah.
So I've never laid anyone off, and I don't plan to, because the systems we put in place scale and grow with us as we have ups and downs of the industry. And the technology that we put in place needs to fit that mold. And this has so far. So we're thrilled with it.
And that's absolutely key when for us, is that we want sites to, when they're using our platform, to be directly integrated into their workflows, so that the work is very low, but also that it works across every single study that they're running.
Right.
So that's fantastic.
And to answer your question real quick in the chat, we do send informed consents ahead of time a lot. Typically when a patient confirms and they have an informed consent, that's a really high quality patient. A lot of times they don't read it or they don't want it sent, but they'll show up and they'll say, oh, I'll just read it when I get there. Okay, that's fine too. We do e-consent sometimes, but a lot of times it just adds complexity to a fairly simple otherwise process. I don't like to do e-consent from home, because when they sign the consent at home, that starts the screening window, which means that your screening window is shorter than it needs to be, because you can just sign the consent when they show up.
Excellent.
Sorry, a little off topic.
No, it's good. I think this is the aim. I mean, thanks so much, Luke. You've shared with us so much of the challenges that research sites face, how this affects your business day to day, how you saw, and just grateful for you to, pulling us closer to the site side and seeing what we had and how applicable this could be for your, to support those workflows that you have. We dived into the platform a little bit, how it works for your business, and we've gone through the results and the impact. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's been great speaking with you. And this is just the first of many conversations I think we're going to have together and share this with the wider industry. And thank you everyone for joining us. And please do join our next session.
Great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Luke.
Thanks, everyone.